Good morning, it is now March the 26th, so it's kind of starting to get a little bit scary, starting to think, oh, have I got enough time to get this van done? But we have an update. So one of the big things about having this van is that there is a bulkhead, there are no windows, so I have no way of seeing out the back, there's no rear view camera of any kind. So what we ended up doing was installing our own rear view camera, digital one with a monitor in the front. So it's pretty self-explanatory. The rear view camera is made of two parts: the actual camera unit that is mounted here on the brake light, and the main monitor in the front in the cab, which when I turn the ignition on, you should see lights up with our reversing camera. And it's one of those things that I've watched several things online, and I don't think anyone quite captures everything to do with the process. So what I thought I'd do was show you how I installed mine. So here is how I did that. So the next part of the plan is to fit the reversing light on the back of the door. But to do that we need to take off this panel that has been put on and it's been riveted on. So we're just bashing off those rivets. So the challenge now is wiring it down through here, down here and through this pipe that kind of zigzags and out this end. And then we'll worry about getting the rest of the way. But this bit at the moment is the crux of the situation. Now for the actual unit here on the back, I believe I paid somewhere around £200 for the whole system, and I got it online. I will fact check everything and put that in the description. So this is the original brake light that we've taken off, and it is essentially the same thing, just with the camera attached and an extra wire to run the camera. Now you see the original brake unit had one connector here, which I'll show you what it connects to. I filmed that the other day. And that's the only real connection you need to do, and then this just you need to seal onto the back door. So obviously we've taken this one off. There's a couple little spring clips here you just put your screwdriver in through the back of the van and unclip those. And then yeah, you connect in the new light and also you run the wire. You encounter the problem where this wire is coming out too far away to sit flush here. So we're going to have to cut this part of the van out. So we've now cut a little bit out there. I'm just going to take this small file and file it down and put some red oxide on it before putting the camera in. So this here is the back of the door, and originally we had a panel on here like this with some rivets in, so we had to get those off. And behind this panelling what you have is your main electrical cable, which is one of these ones down here, which runs up to your brake light and connects all the way back to your fuse board. And what your job is essentially to do is connect that to your new unit, but also connect this, which is your camera monitor feed, all the way through the van, which is a little bit of a chore. The only tricky part of the process is actually getting it through this bodywork where you don't really have access to it. So what we ended up doing was attaching it to a fish line, which is essentially like a big long string where you attach the cable through and you can kind of push it. It's made of metal and it pushes through. You push that through and then you can pull it out the other side, and then your cable is effectively run through there. So yeah, it comes through down here, down at the bottom, goes along, back up through this little pipe, out over here, and then it runs down and all the way along through this lower bottom panel, which will eventually be filled in with insulation. And then that comes up and out of this hole in the Transit Custom, and then yeah, we've run this along here. So this wiring here, obviously we still need to tidy it up because this stuff is still just kind of hanging loose here at the moment. So it is quite simple. Once you've got it through this main part of bodywork that's quite hard, you literally just follow it all the way along, and then when you get all the way over to here, you just follow it through the same hole that your brake light cable goes through. So obviously in different vans this runs differently, but mine essentially goes through this top corner here of where the bulkhead is and through to the top half of the cab. So I'll show you that now. So yeah, once we pulled all of our cable out through this top corner of the bulkhead, through this little bit here, now here we've run it along this top trim all the way behind this, and it comes all the way down here and down round in this little channel here. So I've just pulled the van forward here on my drive, but essentially what I'm showing you here is once this trim's pulled back, you can see that in here the wire is running down along this, and then eventually we'll go for a little gap down here which pokes through into behind the glove box. So this looks quite the mess, but what I've done is just pulled my glove box forward using some of the trim removal kit tools, and essentially it just pops forward. So this would normally sit like that, but I just popped it open because that's where all my wiring is. So this might be kind of hard to see, but I've pulled back some of this trim here, which will reveal where the cable goes. So if I show you through, you'll see there's that little gap there of light, which is where that trim is open. So that's where essentially your cables will run down through your trim and then in behind your glove box through that little gap, and your cables will come and sit behind your glove box. So this is the cable that runs all the way from the unit on the back of the van, the brake light, and you run this all the way through, and here is where you connect it up using these connectors, the black and yellow ones, which connect to your monitor and also your power. So this is a big fuse here that I've taped up here. And you have your red and black wires, which essentially get run all the way over to your fuse boards. Your red wire will get jumped onto a piggyback fuse, which I'll show you in a minute on the fuse board, and your black one needs to find an earth or ground point. And luckily in the Transit Custom there is one of those already in place underneath the fuse board. That's all over underneath the steering column, so I will show you that in a moment. Now the other cable you get on here is this green cable, which you might be able to make out says reverse. Now I believe you can attach this to your reversing light fuse if you piggyback onto it, and that means that the camera will automatically change between the rear view camera and the reversing camera when you go into reverse gear. I've chosen not to do this. I'd rather just have the freedom to choose which camera I want to use. It does mean that I have to manually change the camera when I want to reverse, but it's no big of a deal. I'm never in that much of a rush to worry about that kind of thing. So I'd rather personally leave that off, but you can wire that in so that it will do it automatically when you go into reverse gear. So that's all of your wiring essentially done, and this essentially sits behind here, behind the glove box and kind of in this little cubby hole. So I'm going to put that all back, and then that will all be concealed, and I'll show you a little bit more about the other bits of wiring. And now that my wiring is all nicely tucked away, I will just simply put the glove box back on, and that's now there, back fitted. So in the Transit Custom you take off this panel underneath the steering column, and then up somewhere under there is your fuse board. It's actually this black box here where you can see my live wires running. So I've just popped off the lid for the fuse board, and you can see there's quite a lot of fuses, so it can get a little bit confusing. They've all got their different numbers and things and colours. They've all got their different numbers and colours, so it can get a little bit confusing. But the ones we were dealing with are those three kind of browny, orangey ones up at the top, where you can see that kind of big black module is there, which is a piggyback fuse. It's important that we use those ones because they are switches that are only live once the ignition is on. So we didn't want the reversing camera to be on all the time, so some of these fuses can be running power all the time. So those ones specifically at the top draw power only once the ignition is on, and you can test that using a voltmeter. But if I whack up my ISO, you might be able to see that piggyback fuse better. So what that essentially is a fuse going into it with two slots on top to put two extra fuses. So essentially what you're doing is doubling the fuses going into that fuse board. So you can connect not only the main fuse there that was protecting that ignition, but also adding another fuse to run to your camera. So the actual rear view camera is now protected not only by this fuse, but also the one over in the main bit of cabling. Now unfortunately they make it the most fiddly job ever to get access to the fuse board, but also to put the casing back on. So I'm going to quickly do that and then finish off showing you everything else. Okay, fuse board lid is back on, and there's a little groove. You can't really see it there, but there is a little groove for me to run that wire out just so it doesn't get clamped in by the lid of the fuse board. So the monitor cable coming off the back here actually runs under this trim along the top. So if I just pull the wire down briefly, you'll see that the wire runs just along the top here and then goes down this trim through that gap and into the back and connects with the black and yellow connectors. So the problem with this is when this sits in the trim, it's sometimes a little bit loose, and you don't want every little bump you take to knock this wire down and have it hanging out in your face. So what we actually ended up doing was putting some zip ties around it every so often and putting some tape around it so there's no sharp edges, and that just kind of bulks out the wire, which essentially keeps it more snug up in this trim and stops it from falling down when you're driving. And similarly to the monitor cable, the live wire, the red and black, the live and ground wire that is running back to the cabling is also tucked underneath this trim using cable ties and tape just to keep it up there. So as you can see on the back of the doors, where the brake light would have been, there is now a brake light with an inbuilt camera, and it's actually got two cameras, one facing down for reversing and one facing backwards for your usual driving rear view. So that's about where we've got up to in our first few weeks on the van. Progress is pretty good. I've still got 8 weeks, I think, to finish the van up before I go travelling, so I've got enough time. I think I'm pretty happy with how we're going. Floor is in, insulated, lovely. Rear view cameras fitted, that was a big job. And next is to do all of your electrics, because obviously once you start insulating and cladding your walls, you're boxing off all that space, which you'll need to be able to get to and have access to run all your wires. So we'll do that first. We'll run our light wires, we'll set up our Renogy DC to DC charger in the corner in the cupboard that it's going to go in. And I've just got an email to say that that is arriving tomorrow morning, so I'm super excited to have a crack at that. And then once that's done, we'll move on with our cladding, which is another big job. So I hope you enjoyed seeing this first part of the process. If you have any questions about what I've done in these last couple of weeks, or you want to know anything or know why I made certain decisions, feel free to leave a comment, ask me any questions you want, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one.